Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Another Wednesday, another episode of the Weekly Technical Forum sponsored by Love My Tool. Today we have invited our friend Chris Bihary from Garland Technology and also our usual panel members, Paul Orford. Hi, Paul.
Hi, how you doing?
You're neither. I guess I haven't paid attention. You're not at your home again.
No, I'm not in my home and I'm not on site. I'm actually in my own office today, so
Aha.
somewhere a
Okay.
bit different.
Okay. So, and Tim, how are you?
I'm fine, everybody. How's everybody doing today?
Good.
Wicked.
And now, if I understand it correctly, Chris, you're sponsoring a webinar next week. That's on today's topic. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe also talk about your company and give us an update?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Denny. As you said, my name is Chris Bihary from Garland Technology, and next Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, the 23rd, we have a presentation on lawful interception. And Garland Technology, you'll find, is in some cases in the forefront of assisting deploying lawful interception solutions for collecting data and accessing data. So we're bringing to the forefront a good friend, someone I've known for a long time, Tim O'Neill, who's obviously on the show here, who is going to present on lawful interception. And today we're going to be doing a briefing of a little of what we're going to go over, dive into it, and really talk about the application. So, today, we'll dive into it a little, give you a little taste, a little shark bite, I guess, as you would say. And are you hearing me okay, Denny? Is it breaking up a little?
Yes. No, we're fine. We're fine. Go
Okay.
ahead.
All right, great. And so with Garland, we're really a piece of the puzzle when it comes to lawful interception. And what we're doing at Garland is that we focus on. We have a new tagline: "See every bit, byte, and packet." And it's something that Tim's been pushing a long time. And when you really look at the basics, we're providing full access, 100% of all the data that's flowing on the network and giving you access to that. So, we'll dive into some of that detail, but today we'll just give you some sound bites and show you a little of what we're going to be talking about, and then we'll dive into the presentation next week, and hopefully we'll some of the attendees watching today can join us.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Chris. And by the way, we are calling today special. Today's episode is what we call the LMTV for Shakis, meaning that it's supposed to be a technically oriented technology reach kind of episode. So since Tim is going to do it, he can't do anything else anyway. So so why don't you take over, Tim, and be free to after you finish lawful intercept, feel free to go ahead and talk about unlawful intercept.
Well, lawful intercept is one of those definitions that's kind of like if you can get away with it kind of situation. But really, lawful intercept is anything that you do that's legal. In other words, if you're a network manager and you have the right to monitor a network, then it's legal. Okay? If you get a warrant from a courtroom, that's legal. If a judge orders you to review your network for compliance or for auditing complaints, that's legal, as long as you're the person or persons that are charged with that detail. A lot of companies have policies, and most companies should. Every company should have a policy and a procedure so that when they do find something that's not right, you have a user that's doing something malicious, you should have a policy and a procedure that allows you not only to say, hey, I saw it, but I'm reporting it. And it is, by the way, paramount that if anybody does see any criminal activity, they must report it, or you can be held accountable for that crime. So what we're going to do next week is we're going to cover the basics. Lawful intercept, when I do a curriculum here for the police departments, the police officer standards and training, it's a 5-day, 40-hour plus or minus curriculum, because it involves all kinds of areas. And what we're outlining here, the slide that Denny put up for us, thankfully, is the 6 types of lawful intercept and access, with one exception that I left out. But I'll talk about that one later. CALIA, that's the thing you hear everybody talk about. That's the communications assistance for law enforcement. And that was actually originally done back in the 90s, but they gave everybody till 2007, all of the ISPs, the service providers, and by the way, this is United States or domestic only terms that I'm using. There are hundreds of other lawful intercept standards across the world. They all are pretty much the same as ours is. What CALIA required was that if you're an ISP, that you had to have, in case you were served a warrant, the ability to access the network, and not just capture pieces. You have to capture everything. Okay, that includes signaling, includes voice, video, fax, everything. So a lot of people kind of got that confused in the early days and thought that all we had to do was catch packets. Well, packets, as you know, are just parts of a document or a picture or a video. So with CALIA, you got to be able to capture it all. And I've never seen a situation where they've used span ports and been in lawful intercept. And I'll talk a little bit about span ports a little more as we go through it. The second thing you're going to run across are warrants. And, CALIA is the federal warrant. But you can have other warrants issued by the county, by the city, by a state, okay, or by an agency in the federal government that would require you to do certain types of monitoring and analysis on your network. Everything is always covered under the regulations or the requirements of Rule 41 of the federal code, which says it has to be evidentiary value. In other words, that means it has to be everything, can't be parts and snippets, and it's got to have some methodology that's validated to capture it. The new word we're talking about out here today is e-discovery. That's civil processes. Let me give you an example of civil discovery or e-discovery is that if a company thinks someone has done something wrong, let a piece of information go out from a brokerage firm, or someone lost a lot of money in a trade, and they're saying that the brokerage firm didn't send out the request at the right time. Those are things that you get court orders to go and look at and find out what's going on. Again, the e-discovery can turn into criminal events, but most time they stay in the civil world. Corporate compliance is another type of requirement for lawful intercept. If all of the companies that have recently been attacked by the hackers and stolen millions of customers' IDs, password, credit card numbers, etc., had really used compliance and really studied compliance, did deep studies on it, and also had done studies on how they're holding our data, they would be not hacked, or they would have not gotten as much information. But lawful intercept in compliance is a requirement. The FISA just recently was in the news. That's the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, and they've added a whole bunch of new capability to their warrants. These are warrants that are issued by a judge that exists in the alphabet soup world, the CIA, NSA, NRO, you name it. There's a bunch of them, DIA, and they can also issue a warrant for someone to monitor surveillance of foreign communications, either inside the United States or outside. And one of the newest ones is WISPA. That's the wireless intercept, or wireless internet service providers, and it's a brand new standard. It's been out kind of about 3 years now, but it's a brand new standard. So, again, this is something new. By the way, in WISPA, they actually specifically say TAPS. CALIA has changed most of its language now to say TAPS, but there are some other ways that are being used by our federal government to capture data that does not meet the requirements of the courts. So Lawful intercept is really anytime you get in the network, do you have the right to do that? And certainly, if you're a network manager, your job is to monitor the network, to make it secure, to monitor it. But you got to be careful with the information you gather. You get the wrong information, and you can be charged with a crime. It's happened a number of times to people in networks. So you got to think about what you're doing, what's the requirements, and build your network to monitor that. Now, I keep going back to the fact that, and I'm a tap nut. I think taps are the only way to capture data. And when you're capturing data for law enforcement, you better be able to stand in a courtroom and raise your hand and swear that you've captured every bit, byte, nibble, and octet, good frames, bad frames, and everything, to meet the demands of a warrant, court order, or whatever. And the only way you can do that is by using a tap. So, you know, it's just imperative. It's an imperative today to create a visual landscape or a visuality plane, a visualization plane. That's better. A visualization plane, because if you can't see your network, you're never going to know what's going on. And when it comes to capturing for lawful purposes, you want to have the very best view you can. And that's one of the reasons we just recently had an article posted by one of our friends in Germany who was using tabs, and it just really shows you the difference. Now, if you're a Sharky, you're a Wireshark geek, we get away with looking at things a little differently, but a tap is always the best process. You know, just like buying a Maserati and putting retreads on it, not a real good way to go. You want whatever's touching your environment, you want to be the very best.
Well, it's the foundation, Tim, right? So, I mean, that's, you know, at Garland, really what we want to stress is the foundation of the lawful intercept. So if it's within a network, if it's from a court order, it really doesn't matter, you know, what you're doing. And quite frankly, if your job is to just, even if it's not lawful interception, but it's just to do some level of network monitoring, don't you want to start with a foundation where you're getting all the real data, you're seeing every bit, byte, and packet? So it comes down to foundation. And, you know, with lawful interception, you're being held accountable to say, you know, show me and prove it. And if you have a court order, you're going in front of people and you know, showing that, yes, I have collected everything. But when you're even looking at day-to-day jobs, you know, if your job is for, you know, keep the network performing well, and I want to monitor that, and or I need to secure my edge of my network, at the end of the day, if you're going to have some type of analyzer or tool, security device, wouldn't it be important to have that foundation start with the real data? And that's really what we try to focus on and educate customers and partners with. Is it is important to start with a strong foundation no matter what you're doing in network monitoring. And in this case, you know, you have to prove it, and you're being asked to prove that you're showing all the data. So it makes it easier to say, yeah, you got to have a good foundation. But I think, you know, when you start looking at jobs within networking and security, it's critical that you have all the data, and it's coming from the wire. You're not relying on a third party. You're not relying on your switch, your router, a device to replicate something and tell you, you know, it's what it is. We're actually breaking the wire, and, you know, with a tap, you're physically going at the layer one and saying, here's a copy of everything that's flowing on that wire. We don't care what it is.
You know, to be honest, I'm still kind of surprised that the industry is still having this conversation. I mean, it's been 10 years since we first saw what we would now call a smart tap. You know, not just a passive optical splitter kind of tap, but with some smartness to it, with some electronics, you know, like aggregating taps or so forth. And it's been 10 years, and we're still talking. I mean, to me, it's like arguing about essentially the chain of custody. You know,
yeah, I mean,
so. But now I understand. You know, like I think Paul kind of. I mean, Paul and I, we had this conversation in the past in this forum. from a troubleshooter standpoint, you don't always have that luxury. You go into a customer's network. You're not gonna get very far by starting a conversation with saying, well, let me break your link. That's not gonna work. So I understand that conversation, but here we're talking about really designing the network for future access, right? So to be honest, I'm a little surprised that we're still having this conversation.
Yeah, actually, the first Ethernet tap that I played was 1995, and it was an aggregating tap. Pretty well, but people forget that it's not just the frames that you need. You need to know what's going on in between, and it's a shame when people like Paul, Tony, any of our friends go into a company and say, "Where can I access your network?" and they look at you with a blank stare. That really tells you that they're not really being able to do their job correctly because they can't see the network. And now with the recent things that we've heard about, it's not that hard to hack a span port or a switch.
Yeah.
It ain't that hard to hack a router.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to use that as your visualization point, that's dangerous.
Yeah, Tim, let's get back to Lawful Intercept. The question I have, it is really just more for my own curiosity, is this a legal responsibility for anyone who runs an enterprise? I mean, like, let's say, I can think of extreme cases where I'm running a coffee shop, and some people comes in here, use the public Wi-Fi, and then the next thing I know is FBI comes in, knock on the door, and says, "Hey, this is what you have to do." Does this happen? And now the other extreme would be that I'm Comcast. I'm actually running. I'm an ISP, and I'm providing a pipe to, ordinary citizen, and again the government knocks on the door. What exactly is the legal responsibility for us, for business owners?
Worldwide, including Europe and the United States and most of the Western countries, if you have an ISP, whether it's a wireless provider, okay, which would include cell phone providers, in your ISP, you are required by some law to have access to the network. So if a warrant is issued, you must be able to give them the information they're requesting for that warrant. And there are three basic types. One is having your own platform, your own visibility port, which is the best thing because then you can use that for your own, monitoring and analysis and looking for aberrant behavior and things like that. The second method is called third party, trusted third party. A lot of smaller ISPs went with that back before 2007 when the law took effect. And it sounded great because it was relatively inexpensive. And they basically came in and put a platform in so that when a warrant was issued, they could come in and plug in the tap that they needed and then give access to the government the way the government wanted to port the data out. The problem with that is if you get a big warrant, we had one warrant here in Georgia that wound up causing a medium-sized ISP about $3.5 million in third-party charges, which was pretty startling for them because warrants can last for quite a while. They may not be just an hour a day. They could be, well, in this case here, it was about 14 months. Now, the third way you can do it is you can build a packet transport system using expensive routers where they will grab packets and create a UDP frame around it, okay, and then send that through some backline VLAN or pipe to a government location. That's a very expensive method to go, and it's very hard to manage. It's not something that your normal, it's not something I'm going to run around and do, or probably, Paul could do it, but it's probably not something Paul's going to do. I don't know, Paul, have you seen many systems like that in your running around?
I tell you, I'm listening to this. I'm so far out of my comfort zone. I haven't really seen anything like that going on, and I have worked in some government agencies, and other highly sensitive areas. I don't see any continuous capture going on, but I haven't been that involved with ISPs and our involvement with me is quite minimal. So I suppose the bottom line is no, not really. But the thing that struck me, and I understand what you and Chris are saying about having that solid foundation of delivering every packet, I'm just wondering how the heck you're going to record them all. And, you know, is there some level of intelligence in the tap device that makes sure the only stuff that gets recorded is what you did, or would that invalidate the evidence anyway? I mean, how is all this handled? Because this must be churning up petabytes of storage somewhere.
It could. Most people today, when the government gives them a warrant, it's usually an IP address or an IP to IP address or some, you know, fairly monitored or very finite. They don't want to get too much information because then you get sued or you get put in jail for getting other people's information that you don't have a warrant for. I think the best way to do it, and a lot of people like it, is to go ahead and get a tap, because you know you're getting every bit, byte, nibble, and octet. Okay, you can use an advanced filtering system. Okay, some people refer to those as packet brokers. I don't. You can also use a metadata analyzer, which can capture many, many weeks of information without having to have a deep capture engine. Some companies do keep deep capture engines, as you know, they're available, and in that way they always have a place to go back to. Because, for instance, if you are hacked, someone does get in your network, one of the first questions you get asked by the governmental body, the ruling government body, is, well, how many people's name, address, phone number, credit card, whatever, was stolen? The wrong answer is, I don't know. Because if you say that, all the governing bodies now are assuming, under law, they're assuming that you lost every piece of personal information that you had in your system. So, a la Target, Home Depot, Kmart, Bank of America, Barclays, it goes on and on and on. Can you imagine some company that has the Target event, hundreds of millions of people's information? And that's how you get fined. They fine you for how many days the event goes on. If you can't prove pretty accurately how many days it was, and you can't prove how much was stolen, you're going to get a heck of a bill. And the rumors are that, and again, these are rumors, but we're talking about fines in the multi-million-dollar range for companies like Target and that. And
hey, Chris, I think that we should schedule a presentation for you where you come in, and it would be more like a case studies, right? Where you just basically list all the applications for TAP, and what you see in the marketplace. I know that my last company, we didn't really sell TAPs, but it turns out that TAP is a big part of the conversation.
Right.
And it's always interesting to me just the variety of reasons why people want to have access to the network. It could be data leakage, it could be compliance, and I mean, it's just the list goes on and on. I think it would be really educational if you were to come back with a presentation and just call it case studies for TAPs.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
now,
we could do that. I mean, one thing too I'd recommend is that's one of our focuses actually in our blog. On a weekly basis, we're not sending out tap tap tap. We're really talking about the application. So that's something exciting too. If people are interested, we're talking about data leakage. We're talking about compliancy. We're talking about intrusion prevention, application performance monitoring, web monitoring, because it's the application that's really the important piece here. And what we try to focus on is that we're just the foundation to send the data. And as Paul said, what do you do with all this data, right? So you do you're not always using all the data, but you should start with an access point that gives you everything, and from there, depending on your application, you can then decide what you're going to do.
So a follow-up question, and that's really the question that's relevant today to today's topic, is that I'm wondering if you could tell us from your perspective, who are the customers who would buy taps for Lawful Intercept? Is this really an ISP problem, or for the big boys, or is this a problem that affects everyone? I want to hear your perspective on this.
Right. Well, I think it is. It's the ISPs, it's government agencies. So, it's really falling on both. So they're both seeing that. And I know, I personally don't have experience. I know Tim may know, as on the CALIA side, I know some of that was also pushing into universities. And I don't know if Tim could add to that piece of it. But what I'm seeing is definitely on the government side, on the enterprise side. With the ISPs, mobile carriers, there are requirements where they have to provide access, for lawful interception.
Yeah, I was going to say, the one thing I did want to answer was Paul's last part of Paul's question. What about taps that have smartness in them? When you start talking about smart taps, you have to be careful, because if a tap has a buffer in it and it has a bus line running through it, it's no longer a tap, it's a fancy span port. Okay? At least try to hand them every packet. If they mess up in the filtering, that's not your problem. But you also have, quote, taps out there that auto-negotiate. That's not good either. Try to get a real tap. They're not that expensive, and trust me, what you'll see is a world of difference. As far as there has been a lot of talk in the FCC, because originally CALIA was anybody that serviced other people, serviced the connection of people to the internet or to a computer system, which had access to the internet. I think there's been a lot of discussion about colleges. Okay, there's even been a lot of discussion about companies that offer external access to their employees through the company to the internet, through VPNs, different transport domains like that. It's been under discussion now for years. I think we're going to see some big changes in CALIA, because now the FCC has had a learning curve. They're seeing what's happening. And it's been disastrous in a few cases where people have taken a shortcut to get the information and been challenged by, and of course defense attorneys are getting very smart now, and you don't want a defense attorney to stand up in court and say, you mean you only got part of it? How do you know that all of that belongs to my client? Because remember, it's when you're prosecuting, it has to be a preponderance of the evidence. I think someone once coined the phrase, if they don't fit, you can't, commit. So, you got to have everything. You got to be able to look at everything, signaling, everything. So it's really, and we have to be careful, because remember, we're humans. We don't look at bit bytes, nibbles, and octets. We only look at data. When you show me a JPEG, I don't see a bunch of bits, bytes, nibbles, and octets. What I see is a picture. I don't read JPEG tables. So we've got to be able to reconstruct everything in a courtroom, both digitally and data-wise.
We're coming up to the half-hour mark. I wanna close the presentation. What we're trying to do today is not really dive deep into the subject, but just kind of lay the groundwork, and also more or less tease our audience, so that they can come to the webinar next week, which I believe is only the first of what would like to be a series, right, Tim? I mean, Tim and Chris.
Yes, as Tim mentioned in the beginning, this is something that he can take a whole week on, and so we're going to be doing a presentation next week on Thursday the 23rd at 11 a.m. And but I believe, and I think Tim believes the same thing, is we will be doing a series here, because there's a lot of information, and I think it's interesting to people to learn more about this. And a lot of it can dive into, if you're an engineer, security engineer, what's happening in this space can really carry over and I think be effective knowledge for people who have to run their internal networks.
Yeah. Now, if our audience are watching this video through our Love My Tool page, there is a link there that goes to that allows them to register, and hopefully later, once the event is over, watch the recorded video. But if people happen to be watching this from a YouTube, how do they find you, Chris? And then once they find you, how do they find that invitation, and then eventually how do they find that archived video?
Yes, for registering, they can actually go to garlandtechnology.com, and they can register there. You can also, if you want, click on the blog tab on the top, and that's another great resource I was telling you about earlier to get education on solutions. So we're not going to be sending you tap articles every week, but we're going to be talking about specific solutions and for security, network performance monitoring. So I also recommend that people access that as well.
Okay, thank you, Chris. And Tim, I know you give lectures on this topic, and you actually do that in front of law enforcement officers. Do you have? Is there? How would they find you if they? How would they, if they really want more information? How would they contact you?
Well, usually law enforcement goes to their command, pardon me, to their command structure. I'm a Georgia Post certified instructor, but they can either reach out to me directly, tim@oldcommguy.com. November 1st and 2nd, we're doing some classes here on forensics that are available to law enforcement officers. So that's the easiest way. Reach out to me, and I can tell them what classes are going on, where they're at, or when we're doing the next one.
And can you give us an overview of what you're going to be talking about next Thursday?
We're going to be talking about the fundamentals.
Mm-hmm.
The fundamentals of lawful access, the common points. The neat thing is, all of those titles I gave you have really standard common interface requirements. They're all the same. So whether you try and do compliance auditing, lawful intercept, just monitoring and analyzing, security monitoring, you got it. You have to have good access, and we're going through the basics of that. We got 20 minutes to cover a subject that, we generally take quite a bit more time to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Like Chris said, we're going to try to spread it out over a period of time too.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so I think we're going to close the show. Hey, Paul, any last comment?
All I was going to say was it's quite Lawful Intercept's quite topical here in the UK at the moment, because next month the government's going to try and discuss what's called the Snoopers Charter here in the UK, but the Data Communications Bill, which was torpedoed in our Parliament a year or so ago, and they're going to have another go. So they're trying to require ISPs and mobile phone companies to constantly record a certain amount of data. And there's been a lot of talk about metadata versus the content, etc. I don't know much about it, but I know this is all going on next month. So,
well, everything I know about surveillance in your country, I learned from Law and Order UK. But since the show, that's the end of my education. So. But I actually do find it interesting that there's some subtle differences between our two countries in terms of lawful intercept. Not sure which one is better. But anyway, with that, I think what we wanted to do is again lay some groundwork and really invite you to the webinar next week. And you did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted everybody to know October is Cyber Safety Month. So if you don't know anything about cyber safety, look around, go on the internet and Google Cyber Safety Month, and they'll talk about different things people should look at. It's also Halloween, a day where we let our children go out, and or All Saints Day, depending upon where you're at in the world. Children should be very careful, and parents hopefully will think about that. But cybersecurity is something that we should think about every day.
Okay. Well, thanks again, Tim. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Denny.
So we should be seeing you more often, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, with that, we'll close the show. Thank you very much. See you next week. And go out there and be good. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Paul. Bye, Chris. Bye, Tim.
Bye, Denny. Bye, Tim. Bye, Paul.
Hey, Chris.